Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. Just to let you know before we start, my first ever full-length fantasy novel has just come out on Amazon under Morning Rain Publishing. Titled To Kill a Dragon, it's available now for an ebook format. If you'd like to take a look, maybe give it a review, I'd be incredibly grateful. After all, if I'm dishing out, gotta be able to take it too. But on to the matter at hand, let's talk about the self-titled album from Pentatonix. I have to admit I was hesitant about covering this album. And no, not just because covering fellow YouTubers always makes me feel a little bit awkward, although you could argue that most acts starting these days can present themselves as YouTubers if they do enough vlogs. And it's not that YouTubers can't transition to making very respectable, very strong music. There are plenty of examples that prove that misguided assumption by the mainstream record industry false. I mean, look at Lindsey Sterling. No, my concern is rooted in something a little bit more universal, with the closest analog being when the one big hit of a one-hit wonder is a cover. Because eventually, you have to start writing your own songs to find a unique musical identity. It was one of the biggest stumbling blocks that hit Carmen with their major label debut album last year. And deep down, I was dreading that happening here with Pentatonix, the 5-person singing group that became a YouTube powerhouse in a cappella arrangements and covers of popular songs. Now, I'll admit not being the biggest fan of Pentatonix. I liked a lot of their covers, they had unique personality, but they were never really a group I found as more than just a curiosity. But you know what, maybe that was me being unfair, because they had always had a few original tracks across their albums, and the 5-person a cappella presentation guaranteed that they'd have that unique personality that so many one-hit wonders have lacked. Hell, they've already won a Grammy for it. And besides, if you cover so much material, you're bound to pick up some tricks of the best in terms of melodic composition and writing. So I did have hope this would come together. After all, I wouldn't have gotten this many requests from all of you if this wasn't a good project, right? So I checked out the self-titled album from Pentatonix, with the majority of it being original material. Were all my fears unfounded? Well, here's the thing. How much you will like this album is dependent on how much you've accepted the increasing wave of a cappella music and modern pop. And thanks to musical successes of Glee and Pitch Perfect, if you're a fan of either, you'll have an easy entry point to Pentatonix and you'll probably really like this album. But even if you're not into either, and I would get why, they both hit real points of diminishing returns, the self-titled record from Pentatonix does have some real high points regardless, at least in terms of infectious pop music that springs from the internet's unique well of eclectic taste. In other words, I like this album a lot more than I thought I would. And for a change, my discussion of instrumentation and production will perhaps be the shortest it's ever been. The only instrumentation that's on this album consists of snaps, hand claps, and the vocal percussion and beatboxing from Kevin Arusola. That's it. Any melodic backdrop has to come from the layered vocals of our singers. Mitch Grassie's lilting countertenor, Kirsten Maldonaldo's strident soprano, Avi Copland's supple bass, and Scott Hoying's soulful baritone. Now that's not saying they don't use some vocal production. If you listen closely, you can pick up the reverb or hints of pitch correction to add a little bit of depth and color to the mix, or that they don't use a full backing choir like on Misbehavin or New Year's Day, of which I wouldn't be inclined to say it's cheating if it wasn't so well executed. And really, for as polished as the production is, and on some of the R&B and hip-hop inspired tunes, it falls very much in this vein, for better or for worse, we'll come back to this. It doesn't have that blatantly synthetic or slapdash layering that plagued Glee production. That sound was done cheaply and quickly, mostly because it was. And you know, it helps the group has natural chemistry, which is highlighted on most of the traditionally arranged a cappella tunes near the back half of the album. But what I wasn't expecting was some of the choices of leads. Normally, Pentatonix has been pretty democratic in deciding who takes the primary vocal lines, but across the majority of this album, it almost seemed to fall by default to Scott Hoying. And this isn't a bad choice. Outside of his thin falsetto, Hoying has probably one of the more versatile vocal tones of the group, but he's more than capable of handling that lead spot. But I do think the standard edition of this album could have benefited from giving the others a few more unique tracks for themselves, particularly Grassie, who sees most of his leads pushed to the deluxe edition of the covers, and Maldonado and Copland only get leads for one song apiece. Granted, they also found room to include an appearance from Jason Derulo on the Shy cover, If I Ever Fall in Love. And while Jason Derulo acquits himself pretty well, he actually sounds better than I expected, his looser tones and delivery don't quite click into the harmonies as well as they really could. And I'll say what I always do about groups that have multiple lead singers. If your songwriting doesn't set them to play off each other or tell more stories with each other in some way, shape, or form, it just strikes me as a bit of a wasted opportunity. Granted, the songwriting doesn't really have that sort of ambition beyond your pop staples. Love songs, heartbreak, and a few affirmation songs to bookend the album. And honestly, the lyrical content doesn't really stretch into interesting territory beyond a couple details. I really like Misbehavin for playing the Andy Grammer Honey I'm Good mold about having fun on the road and yet still staying true to your lover. Crack takes a bluesy stomp that might be a little bit out of Pentatonix's wheelhouse when it comes to vocal texture, but lyrically it actually is pretty satisfying. And the inversion of hip-hop bragging cliches to focus on the work on First Times First is actually pretty damn satisfying. That said, it's the usage of those other genre elements on this album where I feel that I respect them for experimenting, but the steps are awkward to say the least. Well, it's because there's not a hardcore or rough bone anywhere within this band. It makes singing seeing pieces like the rap bridge on Sing feel about as ridiculous as when S Club 7 did it. And that applies to the subject matter too. Like it or not, Pentatonix are too warm and affable to make the slamming of an ex who wants to come back to them on a ref or the icy opulence of Rose Gold all that believable. That said, while I can appreciate the stab at writing a New Year's anthem with New Year's Day, it comes across a little bit too slick and cheesy to really stick with me. Most the same way that there's a significant chunk of modern Christmas music that just doesn't work with me in the same way anymore. And while I know it's not exactly Pentatonix's fault to criticize the lyrics of a cover, I've always found the sentiment, if I ever fall in love, kind of exasperating. If you're so in love with your current girl, why all the more planning for the next one that's gonna come along in your chorus? Why plan for that love while you can focus on the one right in front of you? But really, where Pentatonix shines most is on tracks like the Sunny, Na Na Na, or Misbehavin, where the vocal melody oddly reminds me of George Ezra's Budapest mixed with a theme from Robot Unicorn Attack of all things, or the anxiousness of Water, or the more classical a cappella arrangements like Take Me Home, or the lullaby like Light in the Hallway. And really, the best tracks here do enough to raise this out into some quality territory. But I do reckon Pentatonix, they can do more in the future. In short, this album feels kind of transitional. Pentatonix is testing the waters of an entire record full of original material and stabs towards sounds they might have utilized on covers but never on a larger scale for themselves. And here's the thing. As a full-fledged unit, I'm not sure Pentatonix need to be so tentative. The writing is perfectly workable for pop music, and they could have easily gone bigger and grander if they wanted to. And while I do think Josh Ramsey's harmonic arrangements on his story hit with a more visceral punch for me, Pentatonix, they delivered solidly here, enough for me to give this a very light 7 out of 10. Fans of Pentatonix will adore this album. Non-fans, you'll find a fair amount to like, and given how well this album has sold, being #1 on the Billboard 200 this week, Pentatonix probably have a bright future ahead. And really, I'm not complaining, because this was good. Check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.